Donald Trump is so desperate to block the release of his former national security advisor's book that the Justice Department has taken things a step further. This could potentially lead to John Bolton not being able to collect any of the profits he makes from the book. The administration might be able to do that if they're successful in their lawsuit. Now, the DOJ's move followed their initial action, which was the lawsuit that I'm talking about, arguing that the contents of the book contain classified information, and the release of this classified information would put our national security in jeopardy. No one's believing that. This is a book that embarrasses Donald Trump. There's no question about it. And beyond embarrassing him, there are some damning revelations when it comes to Donald Trump putting himself above the best interests of this country. So let me give you some examples. Bolton writes the following: had Democratic impeachment advocates not been so obsessed with their Ukraine blitzkrieg in 2019, had they taken the time to inquire more systematically about Trump's behavior across his entire foreign policy, the impeachment outcome might well have been different. Now, look, I disagree with him. I think that the Senate was going to exonerate Trump regardless of what we found through the impeachment investigation. But I do agree that they should have broadened their investigation, not only to look into foreign policy decisions, but as Cenk and I said over and over again during this investigation, they should have also looked into Donald Trump's financial crimes, potential financial crimes. They didn't do it. Also, I just want to note, John Bolton saying that the Democrats didn't do enough of an investigation is rich, considering he was called to testify. He was subpoenaed to testify, and he refused to do it. Instead, he saved all of this information for his book, probably because there's a profit motive behind it. But Cenk, I wanted you to chime in before I give you more details.
Yeah, so there's two different issues here. What you think of John Bolton and what you think of Donald Trump. What we think of John Bolton is less relevant because he's no longer in government. He's a terrible person in almost every regard. He's a war hawk. I don't know that I disagree with anyone else more on foreign policy than I do with John Bolton. That includes Donald Trump. I think Bolton is worse than Trump on foreign policy. But that's ideology and principles. And Bolton did a terrible thing here. He claimed that, hey, man, look, if you're going to subpoena me, we got legal issues, et cetera, in case of the impeachment. If you're wondering why he did that, if he was just going to spill the beans anyway, I mean, he's why not just say it during impeachment when it would have mattered? Because his book wasn't ready. So he wouldn't have made as much money if he gave away all the goods in the books during the hearings rather than releasing them now. So his own personal ambition and greed outweighed national security interests that he claims he cares so much about with Bolton. So now that's Bolton. I'm done with him in terms of his, ethics. But that doesn't mean that what he said about Trump isn't true. I believe that it is totally true, and I have a lot of reasons to believe that, even though I don't like the guy. And between Trump and Bolton, I mean, they're both terrible people, but Trump is the proven pathological liar. Trusting Trump over anyone is absurd. And the things that Bolton has to say about Trump are damning.
Exactly. So let's get to this on a more granular level. So Bolton also writes in his book, I am hard pressed to identify any significant Trump decision during my White House tenure that wasn't driven by reelection calculations. And remember, that was the motive behind Donald Trump attempting to coerce the leader of Ukraine to announce this sham investigation into the Bidens, right? He thought that it would give Trump thought it would give him an upper hand in the election. Now, I also want to just go to a short snippet of John Bolton's interview with ABC News. Here he is with Martha Raddatz.
There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's reelection.
You say that you were astonished by what you saw. A president for whom getting reelected was the only thing that mattered, even if it meant endangering or weakening the nation?
Well, I think he was so focused on the reelection that longer-term considerations fell by the wayside. So if he thought he could get a photo opportunity with Kim Jong-un at the demilitarized zone in Korea, there was considerable emphasis on the photo opportunity and the press reaction to it, and little or no focus on what such meetings did for the bargaining position of the United States.
And Cenk, he gave so many other examples, including the example of Trump's negotiations with Xi Jinping of China, and how those trade negotiations were much more about his chances of getting reelected than anything else. I'll give you those details in a second, but thoughts?
So this is the most concerning stuff. Bolton also revealed 18 different ways in which Donald Trump is an absolute moron. And that's entertaining and depressing at the same time. But what's really important is when he sells out our national security for his own benefit. So in the case of the photo op, it's not a light issue, because when you give North Korea something that they want, which is a picture of Donald Trump with their leader in the demilitarized zone, you're supposed to negotiate something in return for America, not for yourself. But when you're more concerned about the photo op for yourself and for your reelection efforts, and you negotiated nothing, well, then you've let down the country and you put yourself above your country, which is not what the president's supposed to do. And that is a relatively minor example. So the major examples are when he says to the Chinese, in regards to Huawei and ZTE, two different companies that are very, very important to the Chinese, that he basically will let them get away with doing things that are wrong so that they can get a deal on trade. And that's the thing about the two things that connect these issues is Donald Trump's stupidity. Normally, even if you were going to be that crass and do that, you wouldn't say to the Chinese leader, hey, I need help in my election. That's why I want to do a trade deal. That's why I'm going to give this Chinese company, a break that I shouldn't give. You would never say that out loud. But he's too dumb to know how ignorant he is. So he just says it. And Bolton and the others are like, oh my God, he just said that he wants help from the Chinese in winning his election. What the hell is he doing? And that's what he got in trouble for in Ukraine. And if Bolton and others had had the courage to say this during impeachment, we would be talking about not just Ukraine, but also what he gave away. The two biggest countries he gave giveaways to are China and Turkey. And Turkey's a whole nother bag that we'll talk about in a second. And you saw what he did in betraying our allies, the Kurds, and pulling out of northern Syria, because he's making deals for himself. I mean, they had to impeach him on this. Both the Democrats and Bolton were so reprehensible in not getting that done.
Right. So that was a good summary. I want to read some of the excerpts from his book pertaining to the negotiations with China. And I also want to quickly play devil's advocate afterwards, because some might argue, and I've seen this argument all over the internet, well, isn't this what every president does? Every president does these types of negotiations, knowing that if the negotiations end up the way that they are hoping for, it'll help them in their chances of getting reelected. That's a fair argument, I think, but let me give you the details of how it went down with China, and then we can discuss that. Trump's conversations, Bolton writes, with Xi reflected the confluence in Trump's mind of his own political interests and U.S. national interests. Trump commingled the personal and the national, not just on trade questions, but across the whole field of national security. Trump said approvingly that there was great hostility to China among the Democrats. This is what he's saying to President Xi while he's meeting with him. He's like, oh, these Democrats, they're too hard on you. They're too hard on you. And then try to remember the Trump reelection ad where he accuses Biden of being too soft on China. It's just incredible. Trump then stunningly turned the conversation to the coming U.S. presidential election, alluding to China's economic capability and pleading with Xi to ensure he'd win. Trump stressed the importance of farmers and increased Chinese purchases of soybeans and wheat in the electoral outcome. I would print Trump's exact words, but the government's pre-publication review process has decided otherwise. And then he writes, she agreed that we should restart the trade talks, welcoming Trump's concession that there would be no new tariffs and agreeing that the two negotiating teams should resume discussions on farm products on a priority basis. And here's what Trump said to him: "You're the greatest Chinese leader in 300 years. The greatest leader in Chinese history."
Oh, God, what an idiot. What an idiot. So I'll tell you why he says the things that he says in those little segments there. So first off, why is he telling me he's the greatest leader in 300 years? Because Trump thinks that's what I would want to hear. And so if I compliment him this way, he'll give me something I want. Because that's how his mind works. If she gave him a compliment like that, he'd go, "Oh, what do you need? Get keys to the city, keys to the country. I'll give you anything you want as long as you compliment me." So that's why in his tiny, minuscule little mind, he thinks, if I give him over the top compliments, I'm going to get help with the election. And second of all, what a terrible negotiator. He tells us side, "Oh, what's really hurting us is what you're doing with the tariffs on agriculture." Why would you tell them that? Okay, then they know that that's where their leverage is. World's worst negotiator. And then he's like, "Pretty, please help me with my election." Begging, tipping your hand, and over-the-top compliments of the other guy are not well known for making a good deal for your side. He just sucks at this.
Yeah, he should take lessons from Melania, who really knows how to use her own leverage to get a better prenup contract, for instance, right? But anyway, moving on to the other examples that were provided by Bolton. So there was some question about why Donald Trump decided to let ZTE off. That's the Chinese company that broke the U.S. Sanctions against Iran, right? So why is it that Trump did that? And Bolton did address it, right? Now, we focused on possible financial ties and how immediately after the ZTE case was dropped by the Trump administration, all of a sudden, Ivanka Trump gets rewarded all these trademarks in China. I'm sure that plays a role as well. But according to Bolton, Trump did it because he wanted to distract the public's attention away from Ivanka Trump's own email scandal. So Ivanka Trump was also using her personal email in order to conduct official White House business. And to make matters worse, she was doing it for months before she was even a White House employee, right? So she was a private citizen for months using her private email in order to communicate about official White House business. And Trump allegedly said, "This will divert from Ivanka. If I read the statement in person, that will take over the Ivanka thing."
Well, I'll give him a tiny bit of credit there, Anna, because that's the first time I've ever heard of him doing any type of strategy. But now let's note the strategy here. I will cheerlead for a person who dismembered a Washington Post columnist, because that'll distract. Yeah, because that'll distract from my daughter's law breaking, the thing that I said my political opponent should be put in prison for. So let's go out there and say, "Yay, beheadings and dismemberments by Muslim fundamentalists." Wow.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sorry, there's just so many moving parts. I want to be crystal clear. I mixed a few things up. So yes, the ZTE thing did happen. And the reason why he dropped that investigation is because he was working on that trade deal with China. So it's a favor for a favor, quid pro quo. That had to do with the ZTE issue. With Ivanka Trump, he wanted to distract from her scandal by releasing a statement in support of Jamal Khashoggi, of what happened basically to Jamal Khashoggi. And here's what his statement said in November of 2018. "It could very well be that the Crown Prince had knowledge of this tragic event. Maybe he did and maybe he didn't. That being said, we may never know all of the facts surrounding the murder of Mr. Jamal Khashoggi. In any case, our relationship is with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia." And I remember reading that statement when we covered that story in 2018, Cenk. But it's just amazing because in his mind, And I don't know. I mean, I guess this is proof that he really does love his daughter, Ivanka, because in his mind, releasing a statement excusing the dismemberment and the murder of a U.S. resident and a Washington Post journalist is better than having the public pay attention to his daughter's email scandal.
Yeah, well, look, he also doesn't think dismemberment's that big a deal. And so, I mean, no other decent human being would think that that was like a good way to distract folks by being in favor of that. And let's also note that he wanted to do a total ban on Muslims, but when there was actually a terrorist who happens to be Muslim, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who beheaded and dismembered someone, he was his biggest cheerleader. So it never has to do with crime or the things that he says he's going to try to solve. No, it's always me. And look, on the Turkey issue, also helping Erdogan try to avoid sanctions for law breaking. And he said that he would try to get the prosecutors removed from the case for criminal law breaking that we were pursuing inside our country. In other words, I'll help you break the law, Turkey, in return for favors. Well, as we saw later with the withdrawal from northern Syria, he did the government of Turkey a lot of favors. At this point, it's not perfectly clear what he got in return, but I'm very curious about that because it's always personal with Trump.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.